Today we're going to explore the power of the few, focusing on the fascinating world of minority influence and the underlying psychology of how social change actually happens. To begin, let's look at the engine of social change. History is filled with transformative movements like feminism, civil rights, and environmentalism. Interestingly, these massive shifts didn't start with the majority. They begin with small but consistent viewpoints that dare to challenge the status quo. This raises a central question. How does minority with no traditional power, armed with only a message, manage to change the entire world? To understand this, we must distinguish between two different paths of influence. On one hand, we have majority influence, which leads to conformity to maintain social order through simple compliance. On the other hand, minority influence drives true social change through a process called conversion. Unlike majority pressure, minority influence forces people to think deeply, leading to a genuine internal shift in beliefs, a true change of heart rather than just a public behavior. So, how do they do it? According to Sarge Moscovici, while minority lack power, they possess a powerful voice and their success depends entirely on how they use it. Specifically, they need three tools. First, consistency in maintaining their viewpoints over time. Second, commitment to show their dedication is not casual. And third, flexibility to avoid appearing rigid and remain open to negotiation. To illustrate the importance of consistency, let's look at Moscovici in 1969 study on color perception. When a minority consistently called blue slides green, they successfully swayed with the majority's opinion. Crucially, inconsistent minorities almost had no effect, proving that a stable message creates the necessary doubt to spark change. However, consistency must be balanced with flexibility. In 1986, Nemeth studied a mock jury discussing compensation for an accident. He found that the minority who was willing to negotiate was far more successful than the one that remained rigid and uncompromising. This suggests that while you must be firm in your beliefs, you must be reasonable in your approach. That being said, even the most perfectly delivered message does not work in a vacuum. Whether conversion actually happens depends heavily on the environment, who is listening, where they are, and the culture they belong to. Therefore, we must view the context as a battlefield of belief. Where success is never guaranteed, we can categorize these contextual influences into three key factors: the individual listener personality, the immediate situation, and the broader cultural norms. Starting with the individual, a major factor is the locus of control. People with an external locus of control believe life is determined by luck or powerful others. Consequently, they are more likely to be persuaded and confirmed. Conversely, there are those with internal locus of control, believe they command their own fate. These individuals are more likely to resist pressure and may even react against overt influence attempts. Beyond just belief, there is also the motivation for control. Research by Berger found that people with high desire for personal control were significantly less likely to conform to group ratings because they trusted their own judgment above all else. Moving from the individual to the situation, the environment can either amplify or mute influence. For instance, a united minority is much more effective than a lone dissenter because they provide mutual support. Furthermore, in ambiguous or uncertain situations, people actively look for information, making them more receptive to a minority view, especially if the source is credible, much like Greta Thunberg's use of scientific support. Finally, we must consider culture, which is the air we breathe. Individualistic culture, like the USA, value autonomy and are generally more tolerant of dissent. In contrast, collectivist culture value group harmony. which is often leads to higher levels of conformity. This is backed up by global evidence such as Smith and Bond's meta-analysis and Berry's study on the Timon versus Newt, showing that the societal needs for cooperation directly shapes how people conform. In conclusion, we can see that the autonomy of change has a complex stance. Social change isn't an accident, it occurs when a consistent commitment and flexible minority meets a receptive context shaped by individual, situation, and cultural factors. To leave you with three final thoughts. First, change is deep. It requires true conversion of beliefs. Second, strategy matters. Consistency must meet flexibility. And lastly, context is everything. The outcome is always shaped by the interplay of the person, the moment, and culture. Thank you so much.